Every currency in your wallet is haunted by a deal made before most of your grandparents were born, a deal struck in a hotel in the mountains of New Hampshire, a deal that was supposed to last maybe 20 years. It's been over 80, and it still decides how rich or poor your money makes you feel. Welcome to Untold Wealth Theory, where today we're pulling back the curtain on the most powerful financial agreement in modern history. It's July 1944. The world is still at war. Bodies are still falling in Normandy. The Pacific is still burning. But somewhere in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, 730 delegates from 44 nations have packed into the Mount Washington Hotel, and they're already arguing about what comes after the fighting stops. Not whether the Allies would win. They were fairly certain of that. They were arguing about something far more dangerous than bullets. Money. Who would control it and what it would be worth? Because the men in that hotel room had lived through the 1930s. They knew what happened when currencies collapsed, when Germany printed money until it was worthless, when trade wars strangled global commerce. They had watched the economic wreckage of the Great Depression help turn ordinary people into followers of monsters. They were absolutely determined not to let that happen again. There were two men fighting for the soul of the new financial order. On one side, John Maynard Keynes, the most famous economist alive, representing Britain. Brilliant, aristocratic, and almost always right. He wanted a neutral global reserve currency he called the Bancor, something that didn't belong to any one country, something that would balance the world. On the other side, Harry Dexter White, a quiet, relentless American economist at the US Treasury. Nobody had heard of him before the war. By the time Bretton Woods ended, he had arguably reshaped every economy on earth. White's argument was simpler. America had won the war, or was about to. America had the gold, the factories, the military. So why invent a fake currency? Just make the dollar the world's reserve currency and be done with it. Keynes pushed back hard. He warned that one country's currency holding that much power would be destabilising, that someday the country behind it would put its own interests ahead of the world's, that the system would eventually crack under that weight. He was right, but he lost the argument anyway. Here's what they agreed to. The dollar would anchor the entire global monetary system. Every other currency would be pegged to the dollar, and the dollar itself pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. So every currency on earth was ultimately backed by gold in American vaults. The IMF was created to help struggling economies. The World Bank was created to fund reconstruction. The rules were simple. Keep your currency stable, follow the system, and America guarantees the gold is there. For 2 decades it worked beautifully. Post-war Europe rebuilt, Japan rebuilt, global trade exploded, economic growth hit rates that hadn't been seen before and haven't been matched since. But there was a flaw baked into the foundation from day one. Here's the number that broke everything: $35. That was the fixed price of gold in dollars, locked, permanent, or so everyone believed. The problem was that the United States kept spending Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War arms race, the Great Society programs, and the more dollars America pumped into the global economy, the more those dollars piled up in foreign central banks, in governments that started quietly asking, is there actually enough gold to back all of this? A Belgian economist named Robert Triffin named this trap in 1960, the Triffin dilemma. The idea was brutal. For the dollar to work as the world's reserve currency, America had to run trade deficits had to flood the world with dollars so other countries had enough to function. But the more dollars it sent out, the less credible the gold backing became. By the late 1960s, France under Charles de Gaulle had started cashing in its dollar reserves for actual gold. De Gaulle called America's position an exorbitant privilege, a phrase economists still use today. The gold was leaving Fort Knox faster than anyone wanted to say out loud. By August 1971, it was a quiet emergency. Nixon gathered a small group of advisors at Camp David. No press, no announcement, just a room of powerful people staring at a system that was mathematically falling apart. On the evening of August 15th, Nixon went on television and told America he was temporarily suspending the convertibility of the dollar to gold. No more $35 guarantee, no more golden anchor. It was supposed to be temporary. It has now been over 50 years. That moment is called the Nixon Shock. And it was, without exaggeration, the the birth of the modern financial world. Every currency you use today, dollar, euro, pound, yen, yuan, is a fiat currency, backed by nothing but the government behind it and the trust of everyone who accepts it. There is no gold in a vault guaranteeing the numbers on your bank screen. There is only the collective agreement to keep believing. Most people think the story ends there. It doesn't, because the dollar didn't lose its position when Bretton Woods collapsed. It kept it through a completely different mechanism, one that was partly engineered, partly accidental, and entirely consequential: oil. In 1974, the United States struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in US dollars. America would provide military protection and political partnership. Other OPEC nations followed. Suddenly, every country in the world that needed oil, which was every country in the world, needed dollars to buy it. The petrodollar system replaced the gold standard as the engine keeping dollar demand permanently high. You didn't need gold backing anymore. You just needed to be the currency that the world's most essential commodity was priced in. The exorbitant privilege Keynes warned about didn't disappear. It just found a new disguise. Think about what this means for you personally. Your savings, your salary, your mortgage, your retirement account, all of it sits inside a system designed by men in a hotel in 1944, cracked open by one president on television in 1971, and quietly rebuilt through oil deals most people have never heard of. The IMF still exists. The World Bank still exists. The dollar still accounts for roughly 58% of global foreign exchange reserves. Countries still price oil in dollars. Nations still borrow internationally in dollars. The skeleton of Bretton Woods is still the skeleton of the global economy. Here's a number that should stop you cold. The United States currently carries over $34 trillion in national debt. A massive portion of that is held by foreign governments, China, Japan, and others, because the world needs dollars and US Treasury bonds are where you park them. America can borrow at rates no other country can match because of an advantage built in 1944 by men who have been dead for decades. That's how deep the architecture goes. And for the first time in 80 years, that architecture is under real stress. China's yuan is slowly expanding in international trade. BRICS nations have openly discussed a new reserve currency. Russia, frozen out of the dollar system by sanctions, trades energy in other currencies now. Some Middle Eastern nations have started accepting non-dollar oil payments, something unthinkable 10 years ago. Whether de-dollarization is a genuine threat or a slow-moving fantasy, the people who built this system would recognise the pressure immediately. It's exactly what Keynes warned about in that hotel room. One country's currency holding all the power creates resentment. And resentment, given enough time, becomes action. If you're finding value in stories like this, the hidden architecture behind the money in your life, subscribing to Untold Wealth Theory takes 2 seconds and means you never miss one. These aren't textbook summaries. They're the stories that explain why the world actually works the way it does. The most unsettling truth about Bretton Woods isn't that it partially failed. It's that something this fragile became this foundational. The global financial system, the thing that determines whether your savings hold value, whether your country can afford to borrow, whether trade flows or freezes, rests on agreements designed under wartime pressure and patched together under crisis. It's not a machine built to last forever. It's a compromise that outlasted everyone who made it. What does that mean for you? It means the money in your account is more political than it looks. Every interest rate decision, every currency intervention, every moment of quantitative easing happens inside a framework that Mount Washington built, Nixon cracked and petrodollars repaired. Understanding that isn't pessimism, it's clarity. The people who see the architecture don't get blindsided when dollar strength crushes emerging markets. They're not confused when US rate hikes pull capital away from everywhere else. They see the bones, not just the skin. That's what financial history gives you that no stock tip ever will. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the dollar's dominance survives another 50 years? Or are we watching the slow beginning of the end for a system that was always supposed to be temporary? Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone, and the debate in there is usually sharper than anything I could script. And if this story shifted how you see the financial world, share it with someone who thinks they already understand how money works. Chances are they've never heard of Harry Dexter White. Chances are they've never considered that their currency, wherever they live, is still living in the shadow of a deal made before their parents were born. The men in that hotel in New Hampshire were trying to build something that would outlast the war. They had no idea they were building something that would outlast the gold standard, the Soviet Union, and every economic theory that was fashionable when they were alive. They built the bones of the world you live in, and most people have never heard their names.